Well, you have to see this. The State Department producing a graphic video showing barbaric acts by that horrible, evil ISIS. Why did the State Department do that? Well, they say to scare Americans from joining ISIS, but critics say looks more like an ISIS recruitment video. More on that in a minute, but first, after weeks of blistering criticism, President Obama finally getting ready to face Americans to tell us how he plans to combat ISIS. The president will address the nation on Wednesday. Senator Ted Cruz joins us. Good evening, sir.
Greta, good to be with you.
A bit of the plan has somewhat leaked out from the White House. This is Washington, but your thoughts on what we anticipate the president's going to say and do?
Well, you know, unfortunately, from the beginning of this, we have seen President Obama being fundamentally unserious. He dismissed ISIS at the outset as the junior varsity. That turned out to be very wrong. Then last week he told us that he had no strategy, to the surprise of nobody.
In Syria?
Well, and for dealing with ISIS. And he hasn't had a strategy for dealing with ISIS. And at this point, we have seen ISIS declare war on the United States. They are crucifying Christians. They are beheading children. They have beheaded 2 American journalists, and they have done so on the world stage, pledging an intent to take jihad to America.
To get ISIS, most people have to go to the route, which would be Syria. You are opposed to boots on the ground, right?
Well, my view is we need to set the objective of taking ISIS out. And
okay,
I believe
assuming he sets the objective, we don't want ISIS. I mean, his Secretary of Defense Hagel certainly has been scary the way he's warned everybody. Assuming he wants that, boots on the ground or not?
We can do this predominantly through a concentrated air campaign. ISIS right now, they're diffuse, they're covering too much territory, they're 10 to 15,000 people on the ground. But what we can't do is simply lob a missile, drop a bomb. I mean, if you look at the Obama-Clinton foreign policy, it's been a photo op foreign policy. It hasn't been focused on a concrete military objective tied to U.S. national security. In this instance, what our focus should be is taking ISIS out so that they cannot project terror and murder Americans.
All right. What do you think of the State Department's video? Is that a recruitment video, or is that going to scare the American not to be a member of ISIS? I mean, where do we get that money?
You know, I just thought it was bizarre. I mean, it was a strange thing to put out. And I think it's a manifestation of what I talked about a second ago, which is a photo op foreign policy or a press release foreign policy. The focus of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy from day one has not been protecting vital national security interests of the United States. Instead, it's been making a statement, and it's been putting out a tweet. It's been fundamentally unserious, and that's part of what has made the world so dangerous.
But talking about danger, one of the things many Americans worry about is people coming into the United States, or even Americans leaving, joining ISIS, and coming back. You have a bill that you have either interest or want to deal with the Americans. What is the bill?
Right. No, that's exactly right. It's legislation that I introduced today. There are over 100 Americans right now who have gone and are fighting alongside ISIS. The legislation that I introduced today in the Senate amends existing law to provide that taking up arms and fighting alongside ISIS constitutes a renunciation of United States citizenship, so that we can't have people who have joined the terrorists using U.S. passports to come back and commit acts of terror here at home. And, you know, Greta, it's my hope that we will see bipartisan cooperation passing this legislation. We've had indications from some Senate Democrats, interest that they may be interested in working together on this. And I hope we see both the Senate and the House leave politics at the water's edge and say, let's all come together when it comes to protecting American citizens from radical Islamic terrorists bent on murdering citizens here at home.
I think you're going to need some help on the House side. Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann is going to be joining us soon, and she similarly has something she wants to do in the House on that. But let me go back to what President Obama intends to say on Wednesday. Does he have to go to Congress to take any more military action?
Absolutely, yes.
Why? Under the War Powers Act, doesn't he have some time to act unilaterally?
Well, the Constitution is the fundamental law of the land. And as you know, the Constitution gives Congress the authority to declare war. And it gives the President the authority to be Commander-in-Chief. And the distinction between the two, the President has inherent constitutional authority to respond to an imminent threat. If there's a clear and present danger to our national security, the President can respond to protect America. But in this instance, the President has said that he doesn't see the urgency or imminence. He's talking about potentially prolonged military conflict that could last months or years, in which case he has a constitutional obligation to go to Congress and seek authorization from
Now, when you
Congress.
say authorization, are you asking that? Are you saying we should declare war on ISIS? If we're going to do the Constitution rule, maybe we should do it like straight up. We're going to declare war on ISIS, and there should be a vote on the Hill on a declaration of war against ISIS. Is that what you're seeking?
A congressional authorization for the use of military force is functionally the equivalent. What the Constitution.
Why not just do it then?
Well, the value of his having to come to Congress, and he stated yesterday on TV brazenly that he doesn't intend to go to Congress. But the value of doing it, aside from honoring the Constitution, is it forces the president to articulate a clear military objective that is tied to national security. There is value in the president coming before Congress, coming before the American people and saying, here specifically is what we intend to accomplish. Here's how we intend to accomplish it. That avoids the photo op foreign policy that we've seen.
Frankly, it also gives him political cover if everything goes belly up on this. I mean, he should say, we were all in this together, including Capitol Hill.
Well, and I believe Congress would authorize military force if he lays out a credible, serious plan to complete the military objective of taking ISIS out. When terrorists declare war on America and behead American journalists, and critically, in seizing Iraq, they're taking control of substantial portions of a nation state with billions of dollars of oil revenue. The level of danger has become an order of magnitude greater because those resources give them the ability to project terror and to murder Americans. And we've got a moment right now when they're vulnerable, when they haven't consolidated power, where if we don't act now, we are tragically, I think the odds are far too high, we'll see another horrific act of terror here on the American homeland.
Senator, thank you. Nice to see you, sir.
Always a pleasure.
And you heard the terrifying warning from Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel. He said ISIS is beyond anything that we've seen. So who runs ISIS? What's the inside story? The Wall Street Journal's Jason Bellini investigating. He joins us. Jason, who's in charge of ISIS?
Hi, Greta. Well, the Islamic State is operating all like a government with a bureaucratic hierarchy, but it hasn't publicly described their chain of command and how decisions are made and implemented. We've been talking with a number of experts to confirm what the leadership structure is of the Islamic State. And I want to take you through it, Greta. According to corroborated information from a Baghdad-based expert, Hisham al-Hashimi, Mr. Baghdadi, he's the leader, he calls himself Caliph, has two top deputies. Now, there are 12 governors of the Islamic State's 12 so-called provinces, and they both report to these deputies. Now, Mr. Baghdadi's deputies are responsible for creating policy and running the Islamic State. They function like departments or ministries. There's a leadership council that makes the laws, a shura council, which advises the leadership council on religious and military matters, a legal council. They're the ones who make the call on executions. The security council handles the executions. The intelligence council, they're sort of like the CIA. They spy on their enemies. The financial councils, they're the treasury. And you were just discussing how the Islamic State has a lot of money in its coffers. Well, they're the ones who manage it. They sell the oil. That's their department. There's also a council to help jihadists coming over from other countries, to help them get in and out, mostly from Turkey, and also a media council responsible for the propaganda. Many people giving them a lot of credit for doing that job very well. Now, you have to consider this realm now has at least 8 million Syrians and Iraqis living within it. So that's a lot of people to be administering, and so you need to have a governing structure. And now we're getting a clear picture of what that looks like. Greta?
Is this structure all in one place? And the reason why I ask is because they're all in one place. It's a lot easier to hit them than if they're all spread out over this vast area.
Oh, not at all. And it's interesting you asked that because, first of all, we don't know where Mr. Baghdadi is. He's most likely, according to sources, somewhere in the region between Iraq and Syria. Now, these leaders, they're distributed between Syria and Iraq. And so thus this leadership structure that you have. So they're not always together. And so there's also what we've been learning about is a fairly sophisticated communication system that they've been developing so that the so-called provinces can relay their information to these deputies who then, if when necessary, take it to the highest level. Mr. Baghdadi, there you see at the top of this flowchart.
Jason, thank you. And of course, you can see more of Jason's report on GretaWire.com. Jason, thank you.
Thank you.
And just moments ago, the House Intelligence Committee wrapping up a closed-door hearing on ISIS. Representative Michelle Bachmann just came from that hearing. She joins us. And of course, there's a lot you can't tell us, right? Fair enough.
That's
Fair enough.
right.
All right. Can you tell us sort of the sentiment? Is the sentiment one where there is increased concern about national security as a result of ISIS? And does it seem to be that more people are on board to do something more than what we're doing or less?
No, absolutely. And this is totally bipartisan. On Intelligence Committee, it's a pleasure to serve because it's a very bipartisan committee, as it should be. We had all of the high power figures from the administration in the room, and we dealt not just with ISIS, but all of the other issues that are going on, aggression from China, also with Ukraine, and a number of areas. But it was really focused on ISIS more than anything. That's really what's capturing people's attention. And so those of us in the committee asked a lot of questions. This isn't new to us. We've studied this for well over 2 years. We saw this go up tempo. And I'm from Minnesota, which has a lot of, unfortunately, terrorist connections, particularly to ISIS. The first 2 Americans that were killed were, with the Islamic State were from Minnesota. We just had another 19-year-old girl.
Why is that? What's going on in Minnesota? I know even Senator Franken on the other side, it was also a senator from your state, is concerned. What's going on in Minnesota?
We're very concerned. People have a right to be safe in their homes, but things have changed.
He was working at an airport for, I mean, of all places. I mean, can you think of a worse place to put someone?
He had access to the tarmac, and he was also cleaning planes. This is the second one who had died fighting on behalf of ISIS. The only 9/11 convicted terrorist, Greta, came from my district in Minnesota. We have the largest population of Somalis outside of Somalia. And of course, most Somalians are not a part of the terrorist activity, but we have a very long, deep connection. At least 50 have gone to fight for al-Shabaab. We now have at least 20 that have gone to fight with ISIS. And it's very concerning. So because of that, earlier this summer, and this was classified at the time, I asked the FBI for a meeting, and I asked them if there were Minnesotans who were fighting with the Islamic State. That was classified information at the beginning of this summer. Now it's known.
And it was known back in the beginning of the summer.
Oh, it's been known. Yeah, oh, yes, at the beginning of the summer. But we've known about the
How long has that been known? Because President Obama, was quite flippant. We keep hitting him over the head with this JV thing, but there are huge consequences. We saw Fallujah fall, and he still thought it was JV at the same time.
The committee has known about ISIS for well over 2 years. We saw the up-tempo probably beginning especially in the fall of last year, well over a year.
If the committee knows it, I mean, I take it the people who are briefing the committee are the same people who work for President Obama,
yes.
right?
Yes.
So what, I mean, what's been the reason why, I mean, has President Obama just been, trying to protect us and keep it all quiet to himself while he's busy doing something, or has he been sort of cavalier and thinking this is the JV team and not paying attention to it?
I can't tell you what the president's reasoning is, because I don't know. But I do know that all of this information was available to the White House on a daily basis. They knew what we knew, and probably even more. And as I saw this go up tempo, when I asked the FBI for the briefing, they told me, yes, there are Minnesotans that are in Syria fighting for the Islamic State. I asked them this question, Greta. It was, if these individuals want to come back to the United States, they have U.S. passports, would they be allowed to do so? I was blown away when the FBI told me they could come back into the United States.
Which is why you have introduced a bill which is, as in some way, a companion to Senator Cruz, which is what?
Yes. And my legislation would say that if you've joined with the Islamic State, you will have your passport removed and you'll begin the process of losing your United States citizenship. You will not be allowed to re-enter the United States. When I asked the FBI, I said, what would happen to someone who is fighting with ISIS? They said they would be allowed to re-enter the United States, as some already have, and they would be on a terror watch list, and they would have to go through screening. I have to go through extra screening when I'm at the airport.
Well, we know why you do, but anyway, I'm just kidding.
That's not a big thing. So we have to do this. This is common sense. We can't allow these Islamic State fighters to come back into our country.
I want to get some sort of sense of how much interest, I mean, I realize you just introduced it today. Do you have any Democrats or other Republicans who have signed on with you yet?
Oh, I've already had some text me and say, sign me on to your legislation. I have talked to Democrats, and hopefully we're going to get them on. I also am talking to our leadership, John Boehner, Kevin McCarthy, and Stephen Scalise, and asking them to please fast-track this legislation and get it through before we go off to the elections. This is important. Here's the other thing, our southern border. Nothing has changed on our southern border in light of the ISIS threat. That is not good news, and that's why we cannot allow anyone to come back into the United States who's decided to fight with the Islamic State.
Congresswoman, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
This is a Fox News alert. Tomorrow, the House will vote on a resolution to condemn the Obama administration over the Sergeant Bergdahl Taliban 5 prisoners swap. Right now, the House Rules Committee is prepping that resolution. It condemns the administration for failing to notify Congress before exchanging Army Sergeant Bergdahl for 5 Taliban prisoners. And President Obama admitting it did not look good. What didn't look good? We'll find out. We're going to tell you. That's next.